Welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show, and as promised, making a return appearance is editor-at-large and a senior political analyst at Time, also political analyst for MSNBC, and co-author of the bestseller Double Down, Game Change 2012. We say hello to Mark Halperin. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Steve, I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
That's my pleasure. Okay, let's start with, of course, the deal with Iran. The AP is reporting today that the U.S. and Iran have been secretly talking for over a year, to get to the point that we've got to yesterday and where we are today. We have the Saudis saying they're going to do what they have to do to defend themselves. Israel saying the same thing. Then reports that they've been talking. Israel's inspecting Saudi's bases. There are a lot of people who say that this deal ties Israel's hands. Is that kind of, do you think, the purpose of the deal, to put Israel on the defensive, back on their heels, so that they wouldn't bomb Iran? Or do you think that Obama fully expects that they might just do it anyway?
Well, look, the relationship between both Israel and the United States and between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu are both pretty fraught. And it's hard to know always what conversations they're having that may offer a window into whether this is truly a disagreement or simply both leaders having to say what they need to say. I think there's no doubt that President Obama thinks the right way to proceed in Israel's interests is to have these secret talks and now to strike this deal as a stage to perhaps a larger deal. And there's no doubt that Prime Minister Netanyahu is much more skeptical of the Iranian government and what might happen. I think in the long run, there's so much scrutiny here that it'll be difficult for the president to do a big deal if the Israelis don't get more in sync with where he is. And the two leaders just had a long conversation in which I'm sure a lot was said in a pretty frank way. Keep in mind also there's other people in the administration with relationships with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but in the end, I don't think the Israeli government is going to do anything except what they feel is in their national security interest.
Now, let's bring it closer to home, and as it relates to this president. Of course, the Congress, we've had both sides of the aisle weighing in and not liking this deal, and they're threatening to go ahead with further sanctions on Iran. Let's put aside what that means for the treaty, but what does that mean for the president? I mean, he's got the people now not trusting him. He's got, Obamacare out there. Many said this was a distraction. We'll get to Obamacare in a second. Of course, they took over the Senate, the Democrats did. But here you have a president now who, is tanking in the polls, and even his own party in the Senate and the Congress is saying this deal stunk.
Well, any second-term president, two things are true. One is they struggle to keep their poll numbers up to the extent people perceive them as a lame duck. And the other is they often turn to international relations, national security to try to get things done because of their diminished influence with the Congress. This president has had an extraordinarily rough political year. John Hammond and I in Double Down make pretty clear part of the reason for that is he didn't run with a very specific second-term agenda. He just ran to annihilate Mitt Romney. And he alienated a lot of people, not just in the Republican Party, but a lot of Democrats in Congress. It's going to be harder and harder for the president to even keep Democrats in line on this deal, on health care, on other things as the midterms approach, because I think the Democrats don't trust that the president has their political interests, their political future at heart, and that's going to make it tough for him to get things done, even in the foreign policy realm in areas like this, where Democrats and Republicans feel so strongly about the issue of Israel and Iran, and where they do have some tools at their disposal, such as passing additional sanctions.
We're talking to Mark Halperin, senior political analyst for Time Magazine and for MSNBC here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Of course, he is the author of Double Down, Game Change 2012, bestseller, along with John Hammond, who we referred to there. Let me ask you this. Did the media know, do you think, did you know that President Obama was lying through his teeth for 3 years when he said, if you like it, you could keep it?
I group myself into the statement I'm about to make. I think it's clear that at the time of the passage of the Affordable Care Act and in the context of the presidential campaign, the press did nothing like an adequate job in fly-specking and scrutinizing the whole law. not just the provisions that have already become controversial and about which the president was misleading in the context of a campaign and governance, but other aspects of the law is to come. And I would hope that as we chronicle what's going on now with the political controversy over the law and scrutiny of the president's past statements on some issues, that we all learn the lesson from that and recognize any government program, but certainly one of this size and this grandeur, is incumbent upon the press to do a lot of scrutiny so the public can make an informed decision. Part of the issue, I've said this elsewhere and received some criticism about it, part of the issue was Governor Romney didn't make health care a big issue in the campaign because he had his own political problems. And so often in the context of a campaign, what gets scrutinized is what one side or the other puts forward. But there's no doubt that even without Governor Romney putting health care front and center, the press should have done a much better job. And that would have been in the president's interest, really, and in liberals' interest, because a law that has no scrutiny in real time is not going to get corrected. And now they're dealing with the scrutiny that's coming belatedly, and it's really setting back their attempts to make the law a practical reality.
But I don't get it, because I mean, you know, with all due respect to you and the rest of the press, and I admire you for putting yourself in that mix. You know, I think the last question I asked you in the last interview had to do with Obama's admitted drug use, and you said something to the effect, if McCain had made an issue of it, the press would have gone along. I mean, you can't convince me that he did drugs when he was in the reserve, and he was AWOL. I mean, all these things that they dig. And here you had a law that not one Republican voted for, and the media didn't think it necessary to find out what the heck was in it. And I mean, I just don't get that. You can't tell me it's not because Obama was a Democrat, and possibly on top of it an African American Democrat. Did that play a role?
Well, I've been outspoken for my career in saying that there's liberal bias in the media, and it's a big problem, and it remains a big problem. So I certainly think that played a role in some of the things you're talking about. I thought the coverage the president got in 2008 was the most favorable coverage of any presidential candidate I've ever covered, and I think his party played a role in that, as well as the historical nature of his election. I will say, though, Steve, that I did not see, and nor do I recall, massive amounts of investigative reporting by conservative news organizations about the provisions in the law that are now controversial. There was rhetorical questioning of some of the provisions, including the ones that have become controversial, but they were mostly cast as bad policy and some skepticism that they would work well. But I think there's enough conservative news outlets now that I think it is not right to exempt conservative news organizations or news organizations that are perceived to be conservative or as watchdogs of a Democratic administration. I didn't see a lot of work by those groups, in addition, for many of the same reasons, not about bias, but simply about resources and judgment about what was important.
All right. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people said that, you know, you weren't going to be able to keep your health care, but also, you know, I think they focused on the death panels, which will be coming. Call them what you will. Rationing is part of it. And I
agree. Huge. It's going to be a huge issue, and that's something else about which the president was not fully forthcoming and straightforward.
All right, so you believe that there will be rationing, aka death panels?
It's built into the plan. It's not like a guess or like a judgment. That's going to be part of how costs are controlled.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
but I'll say something else about that issue, which is we do need to do some of that in this country because we can't afford to spend so much on end-of-life care. A very high percentage of our health care spending is for a very small number of people at the last stages of their life. I'm not saying the system shouldn't allow that, but there's too much cost there. Judgments have to be made. We have this society.
Made by who, Mark? Mark, made by who? The government?
By individuals.
But it's not going to be made by individuals. If you say it's included in the health care.
It's not now. It's not now for many people who have insurance. Their insurance companies make those decisions.
But it's very rare that they. In other words, if someone needs a bypass, the insurance company doesn't say put him in a hospice or give him a pill like Tom Daschle told me that he would do.
Sometimes people run up against caps and costs with their insurance that make it impractical to get some kind of coverage. But don't draw me into a false argument here about what I'm saying. All I'm saying is, as a society, we need to have this discussion in an honest and straightforward way because we can't afford every instance that people would like to have.
And has the president been forthcoming that we need to have that argument? No,
he was not, and Democrats were not when the law passed. But I'll say again, there should have been more scrutiny by all the press, including the conservative press, of the specifics of this. I'm not saying there was none, But there's going to be a lot of journalism done across the board on this issue coming up, just as there has been now on the issue of whether people with individual plans could keep them. There's going to be a lot of scrutiny. We should start now. It should have started a while ago, but it needs to start now in a serious and substantive way with investigative reporting and explanatory journalism rather than waiting until the crisis is upon us, because the law is the law, and we're going to have a discussion as a country about what kind of health care we can afford, particularly at the end of life, when a lot of expensive medicine is often done, that as a society we'll have to decide, do we really want to spend that money?
All right, I got you. Let's move on to the nuclear option. Nothing to do with Iran, but we're talking about the Senate. I sat here Friday and I played Barack Obama, Harry Reid, Joe Biden, railing about how valuable the filibuster is, how our founders, it meant it to be that way, how it shouldn't be like the Senate. Biden, how they're going to break the rule to change the rule, and how he's praised that if his party takes back the Senate ever, this was in 05. No president's ever faced anything like this, and this is for the good of the country. It doesn't stop this, which not to, which parts of laws to enforce, which parts of laws to change without Congress involved. Nobody's.
They're flipping on the issue. It's pretty obvious in terms of the macro of fidelity to the importance of the filibuster versus doing what they've done. One thing is what the Republican Party's done on these judicial nominees for the D.C. court is, it's not completely unprecedented, but it is an attempt to stymie the president's ability to remake that important court in a way that is unusual, and I could argue is in some ways unprecedented. And I think it is not. You can't say it's hypocrisy if they say the circumstances have changed and they've changed their view on it based on what the Republicans did. And I think what the Republicans have done is quite striking. It's not wholly unprecedented. The other thing is I'm not a big proponent. I'm a big proponent of majority rules, and I understand the rights of the minority sometimes has to be an issue. But I don't think the way the filibuster has become so routine, and the way that it is used and other things are used to gum up the way get in the way of Washington functioning way. I think this is another thing being done in a partisan way, which both sides have done over the last few years, that it's going to make it more difficult for Washington to work well. But I'm not all that exercised by the change itself.
Really? So you have no problem with the Congress, with the Senate being like the House?
But it's not going to be about the House about all things. But I do have a problem with one party saying, when we're in the White House, we're going to aggressively remake the judiciary, and the other party not having that same prerogative.
All right. Well, listen, Mark, always a pleasure to talk to you. Interesting stuff. We didn't have a chance to